Stephanie had a good word, a replacement for medical advice. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own story, and then we're going to get into a lot of the ideas and concepts around how we relate to our pain, whether it's emotional or physical, and what we can do about that. I always like to dedicate, I guess, a talk or a presentation to maybe a quote or an individual, and today I've chosen Cookie Monster. So you can perhaps read this, although it's, oh, there we go. I'll let you read that for a minute there. And so this sort of will speak to the topic of how we relate to our moment-to-moment experience. And now I know in the survey that was sent out, people, I think about half or maybe a little more than half said they had practiced mindfulness. So a lot of what I will present comes from mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is a medical intervention that is now offered across the world, particularly in North America, but it is growing and spreading. And basically, it was created in a chronic pain clinic at the University of Massachusetts. And what the founder, Jon Kabat-Zinn, sort of figured out was, you know, after all the surgeries, after all the different kinds of medications, after everything that the healthcare system was trying to do for people, a lot of the patients in the clinic were still really struggling. And he was an avid mindfulness practitioner. And who knows, whatever. I've heard this story that he was sitting in a meditation retreat, and it just came to him in that moment. And then, you know, here we are 30 years later, where that program is huge as a helpful way for people to deal with their emotional and physical distress. And it's quite a beautiful thing. So I would ask that as I go through the slides and everything else, if you can look for things that hold true to you or are meaningful to you, and try to see the similarities that you can relate to, as opposed to the things that you may not want to relate to or say, oh, that's not me, or that's not my experience. So when we can see the similarities and relate in that sense, it seems to be more helpful and beneficial. So these are a bunch of the places that I've worked with. My personal journey started in the healthcare system as a client or a recipient of healthcare, which I still am, and that comes from my experience with mental illness and addiction. And then slowly over the years, as Steph noted, I've been doing a lot of work in schools and businesses and etc. So I'm going to go over my story a little bit, how we relate to our discomfort, cultivating self-awareness that can help us develop those skills. And I noticed in the survey a lot of comments around social situations and communicating with others and how that's received. So I've included a little part on that. And then how can we practice? So some of the things I'm going to ask and talk about are in the self-care guide that is posted on the website. So afterwards, if you want to practice more or explore, you can go and check that out. And so before we start, before I get into the content, I guess, I want to ask everybody if you can just take maybe a minute or 30 seconds to write down on a piece of paper or say it out loud or just acknowledge to yourself any potential body sensations that you are experiencing. So whether you are a little nervous or you have tinglies in your tummy, or if your hands are cold or warm, or if you're sweating, if you can just acknowledge a couple of those things. Part of what we're trying to learn is to develop a relationship with ourselves, really, and what's going on inside our bodies and our minds, which can lead to more thorough and, you could say, helpful decisions about your daily life. And the next question I want to ask is, can you, what if you were to think about one thing or explore one thing about your relationship with yourself or these bodily sensations, what might that be? How are you relating to your experience, whether it's today or in a broader picture? And what might you want to explore further, or can you be curious about that experience and maybe use your imagination to think of maybe different ways or other ways that could be more useful or helpful to you, which will be sort of part of the theme of a lot of this talk or webinar. So here is the man himself, Jon Kabat-Zinn, and he started, I think MBSR was started in the late 70s or early 80s. And as I mentioned before, he ran a chronic pain clinic at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. And from there, MBSR was born. And now, as I said, again, it's offered all over the world. And in Ontario, and I don't know about other provinces, so if you are in another province, you may want to check. It's covered by OHIP, which is pretty phenomenal. And there's also been all kinds of, I guess the word I would use is spin-offs to this program. So there's mindful self-compassion, there's mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, there's all kinds of different ways it's been expanded upon. And me personally, this is, although the picture's a bit old, this is my doctor and my teacher, excuse me, and she's here in Toronto, and she trained with Jon way back when, and she's probably one of the few medical doctors in Canada that provide this service, and also she's been doing it for a very long time. So I always find it helpful to acknowledge personally where I learn from and continue to learn from, and so you have, I guess, an understanding of where that comes from for me personally. As we go on, and also in your personal life, I think it's really helpful to bring certain attitudes or ways of seeing things to your experience that can be really helpful. And in mindfulness-based stress reduction, Jon Kabat-Zinn has these 7 attitudes. There are 7 attitudes of mindfulness that he has articulated, and I think they're really helpful. So I want to go through them briefly, just to maybe plant a seed in your mind about how these things can work in your life. So the first one is non-judging. Now, Jon actually says this, this might be up for nouveau cliche or something of the year, something like that. So what that means is we say this all the time. Don't be judgmental, or you're judging me, or you're judging this. And I think people throw these words around without maybe honoring that there's a deeper meaning behind this, and how this relates to us in our emotional and physical distress is, can we create a little bit of space between the maybe acknowledgement of the discomfort or the acknowledgement of the emotional or thinking trigger, if you will, and not instantly jump into the this is bad, this is good, I don't like it, I do like it, those sort of polarities that we're often caught in, at least I am. So when I can bring an attitude of openness and non-judging to situations, generally I don't get caught in that cycle of this is bad, it's going to be over, and etc. My life's never going to go the way I want it to go, and all these things. So our minds have this incredible capacity to just take us down thought streams or wherever it is, and we sometimes don't wake up for a while, sometimes we do, but it's a helpful practice just to start to notice when you're judging, and can I slow that down? Or can I say, oh my goodness, right now I'm really judging. I'm judging myself, I'm judging the discomfort, I'm judging this person. And the practice is just to notice when that's happening. So the next one is patience. Now, I think I assume it would be most helpful to relate these to our personal experience, but you can also maybe try to understand it, how it might relate to your interactions with other people. So if I'm judging my own emotional reactions or thinking patterns, I lose patience basically immediately. So this is bad, I don't like it, I get impatient, and then I'm really quick to rush to a solution or try to fix it right in the moment. And generally that doesn't work out well for me. So if I'm able to not rush into judgment, and if I'm able to just breathe, then there's sort of a layer of patience that comes in, and I'm less quick to jump to conclusions or get into behaviors that might not be helpful. And when I can layer in the patience on top of that, the next sort of teaching would be this idea of beginner's mind. So beginner's mind means I don't necessarily know what the right thing to do is right now. And that's okay. Actually, it's actually quite empowering. So if I'm able to let go of my judgmental mind a little bit, if I'm able to be patient with that discomfort and the not knowing, then I can have a better chance to bring this idea of beginner's mind where it's, I notice the discomfort, I don't like this, I'm starting to be okay with that, and I actually don't know what the best thing to do is right now. And there's a paradox there where at the same time we are allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, and we are also in some sense gaining, I don't like the word control because ultimately we don't have control. So we're letting go of this need to fix and have an answer, and we're also in a sense becoming empowered by that letting go. And it takes practice, okay, and it takes a willingness to be uncomfortable, but the more that we can open into that space, the better our outcomes are, and the better we're able to navigate those hard times. And that leads to the fourth one, which is trust, right? So I need to build this trust, trust the process, so to speak, right? If I can be non-judgmental, and if I can be patient, and if I can acknowledge that I might not have an answer, but I'm willing to be open to new answers, then I'm not as uncomfortable every time I go through that cycle. And the next one is non-striving. So as this process builds, I'm not as obsessed. So this is personally how it works for me. I'm not as obsessed or fixated on finding an outcome right now. I don't need the answer right now. I don't need to fix this situation right now. I want a better outcome, but I'm not caught in that pattern. And what starts to happen inside of us when we get caught in these patterns is we get tense, and often our breathing shortens. We may sweat, or there's all kinds of things that might happen, and it's different for all of us, but that's the pattern that we're trying to soften. And the next, again, practice, between the non-striving and the acceptance, it's, can I accept that I'm not going to find an answer right now? Or can I accept that I'm in no man's land, so to speak? Or that I don't know where I'm going? Because if we get caught in this idea that we do know where we're going and we always know what's right for us or for the other person, then opportunities or maybe creative imagination, those kind of ideas or solutions don't have space to emerge. And so that's basically it. I guess letting go would be another layer to it. And these things sort of, they're not linear necessarily, but they all work together. So I hope that is helpful. And I guess maybe might be worthy to pause and ask if anyone has any questions about those things, or if what I said makes sense, or if you can see how that plays in your life. So maybe if you could say yes, no, maybe in the chat box, Y, N, or M. That might
Mike,
be helpful
just so
for us.
you know,
Yeah.
unprompted, we had a couple people saying yes, yes, yes. I'm constantly judging myself, and I'm not patient enough. So I know for sure. Yeah, I'm seeing a bunch of yeses right now in the question box. So yes, I think what you're saying is resonating for sure.
Okay, cool. And the thing is, I guess the next layer would be we're human beings, and that's part of being a human being, which is another layer to it, is that, and that sort of fits into that acceptance. Sort of, this is the very nature of being human, is to have these thought processes and behavior patterns. And part of, I think, what's so nice about mindfulness and sort of maybe just being a little bit more aware of what's happening to us is that we just start to disassociate from those unhelpful patterns and cycles. So I'm going to tell you quickly how this worked for me in my whoops. I want to also read you something here, although I can't get this thing out of the way. Okay. Excuse me for, okay, I just want to read you a story that sort of takes that idea a little bit further. And some of you very well could have heard this before. Okay. I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Act 2. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it's still not my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Act 3. I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there, but I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Act 4. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. And Act 5 is I walk down a different street. And so what I really like this story because it reminds me that until I get to the point where I am aware that I'm jumping into a hole, I don't have much choice over my situation. But once I start to realize that I'm jumping in that hole, or that and doing it stubbornly, I can't really get anywhere. But the more that I can bring some kindness and patience to myself and those attitudes, I can start to find a way not to jump in, or to climb out faster, or to just choose a whole different route. And it's by Portia Nelson, if anybody is curious. And I think it's helpful and a nice story, really. And so how all this worked for me personally I'm going to rush through this quick because I know some people heard this too who were at the Toronto group. But about 12 years old, I started to feel really uncomfortable inside, and I didn't like that. And I wanted to find a way to run away from that discomfort. And unfortunately, I found drugs, basically. So I started using drugs to make that pain go away. And over time, this gap between who I wanted to be and who I was got wider and wider and wider. And the wider that got, the more sick I felt inside and the worse my mental health problems and everything else in my life sort of became. And what I really wanted to do was not be myself or hide from myself. So I always tried to be what I thought you wanted me to be. So if I was hanging out with, the jocks, I would pretend to be a jock. If I was hanging out with the nerds, I'd pretend to be a nerd. If I was hanging out with the arts people or the goth people or whatever it was, I would always pretend to be them so that I could fit in or whatever. And when you're young, it's hard, it's different because you're trying to figure out who you are. But without learning to acknowledge who I am and what was going on inside of me, I could never be okay. And I couldn't stand literally 10 seconds in my own skin without wanting to crawl out of it. And that's why I had to be high all the time. Then shortly after that, my brother had his first psychotic episode and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So these sort of layers of distress and fear and anxiety were piling up. Then I learned about my family history. And so part of what this is just expanding our awareness of who we are, where we come from, and how that can be helpful for us to make decisions in the present moment. And then, so my grandfather died by suicide. My other grandfather lived with alcoholism. So there's a lot there that is not surprising that my brother and I, became who we are. And another thing I learned, and this is the title of a book from Jon Kabat-Zinn, the MBSR guy, wherever you go, there you are. So I was always trying to run away from my problems. I was always trying to pretend that if I moved to a different city or if I got on an airplane and went off traveling somewhere that I could escape my problems. But my problems were me. My problems were inside of me. And no amount of running away was going to shelter me from those things. So I really had to learn to face them. And this is a lovely piece of art that my brother did, which I'll just, you can look at it and take from it what is meaningful to you, but it just, I don't know what it speaks to, but I find it quite inspiring. So personally, the last thing I tried to do was fix myself by getting married. So somehow on the outside, I could pretend that I was okay. I was doing really well with the job that I had at the time. And so I could pretend that because I had money, everything was okay. And I could convince another human being that it was a good idea to marry me. And one of the hard things about mental health issues, or maybe I would say more so people living with addiction, is that it's so hard to be honest with yourself. The person I lied to the most my whole life was myself. And that brings with it its own wealth of suffering and denial and panic and all this other crap. And so if I can't be honest with myself, it's very difficult to be honest with those around me. And that was true with my marriage. And shortly after getting married, and we bought a house, and my wife started a business, which I was very much a part of, it all kind of came crashing down. And I knew if I didn't do something quickly, I would never have this. And we're humans, and we want to feel safe. We want to feel valued, and we want love and companionship. And I knew those things would likely disappear from my life if I didn't do something really drastically. And what I did, and this is really important with our emotional well-being and mental health, and I think dystonia and chronic pain type of experiences are a good way to define the two different ways this works. It's when we have physical discomfort, or we break a bone or whatever it is, we're so quick to find the nearest doctor or emergency room or whatever it is and ask for help. But for whatever reason, when it comes to our emotional well-being, that's not as simple. And there are lots of practical reasons for that, such as our mental health system has not nearly evolved to the state that our physical health system is, although, mental health, our brain is an organ in our body, so it is physical health, but there's that gap there. So I learned that asking for help was, I guess, the thing I had to do. And when I did, the amount that I received was sort of more than I ever could have thought possible. And I met this young man. He was about my age, and I started to learn how to be a human being. This person really helped me deal with all my issues, and I also got on wait lists for psychotherapy in Ontario, and I saw it. I got a psychiatrist, all kinds of things. I built this sort of team around myself, which helped me deal with all my issues. And if you parallel that to physical ailments, or even, when I'm speaking to kids, I often say, if you had trouble on your math test, or if you had trouble with something in school, you would go to, ideally, you would ask for help from the person who knows how to solve that problem. And so what I started to do personally was, if I had an issue with my emotions, or with my marriage, or with my work, or whatever it is, I sought out somebody who I thought could help me in that regard. And the one thing that Yoda here taught me was, I can't think my way out of my problems, because it's my thinking that got me into the mess in the first place. And this is relevant to a lot of maybe psychotherapy interventions, is that people are, because their thinking isn't helping, we try to teach them to lead with their bodies and their actions, and that slowly starts to change the way we think. So there's two sides to that coin. For certain people, they can think their way through problems. Other people have to act their way through problems. And me personally, although now it's not quite the same, but I had to act my way out of my problems because my thinking was so dysfunctional and I was such a bloody mess that I couldn't trust myself. There's a famous Buddhist nun, and I forget her name, but she often says sort of, she doesn't want to go into her mind alone, or into her thoughts alone, because that's a scary place. And so we want people around us that can help us, and it can take a long time to find them, right? But it's really important. And it doesn't have to be a medical professional, although I would suggest, if you're in my situation or whatever, or in a similar one, that it can be really helpful to have that too. And so these are, I showed you a picture of Heidi in the beginning, but when I like to think in stories and mythology and etc. So here's them. And this wizard here is my psychotherapist, who's a wonderful person. So I would say, well, personally, these are three things that I think are incredibly helpful. I have a longer list, but for now, being honest with yourself and other people to the best of your ability is incredibly important, and learning to take responsibility for your space in the world, however annoying and hard that is, and service is learning and being helpful to others in whatever capacity you can be. And if you can't, then that's okay too. It's sort of about where you are and what you can do in each moment, and etc. that is important. So full catastrophe living, if you haven't noticed, the theme of this is really along the MBSR stuff. So this is the book. It's the title of a book that is the guide to the MBSR program. And again, it speaks to this idea that life is difficult and there's lots of catastrophes that happen throughout our lives, and it's how we navigate them that really ultimately matters. And so that's sort of, again, where a lot of this content comes from, and also I would say a lot of the way that I've learned to carry myself in the world. So I did talk about this here, that the brain is an organ, it's in our body. So when we have mental or psychological distress, it is the same thing as having an ache and a pain and etc. And we're moving towards that in the healthcare system, which I think is great. Last thing about mental health in this context is depression is the #1 cause of disability worldwide. And that is such an incredibly difficult thing to grasp, at least for me. So I think part of that is, for the first time in history, really, humans have not had to worry about staying alive. So literally up until the Second World War and shortly after, we'd been fighting and killing each other for thousands of years. And now, for some reason, our survival isn't necessarily the #1 priority. So now we're left with what's going on inside our heads to deal with. And so part of this, I think, is a reflection of that. And nobody knows, there's no clear evidence why this is happening and why it doesn't matter where you come from. Obviously, if you are in a war zone or if you're in an abusive relationship or situation, then that is clearly different than the other context of it doesn't matter where you are and what your situation is. It's mind-boggling to me. So understanding, and I'm pretty sure I covered this in the thing in the Toronto support group, but part of what's really important is that we practice these things. It's not necessarily about new knowledge and new information, although that can be helpful. What's most important is that we're practicing the things that we know can be helpful for ourselves. And part of this is learning to be aware of how these things work inside of you. And if we relate it to physical discomfort, what starts to happen inside you when you get the experience of discomfort? And another layer to it might be, can you notice what's happening prior to the physical discomfort happening? So I know in certain situations, from the little I know about chronic pain, a lot of times there's many actions that happen before the onset of the pain. And this isn't sort of, a lot of the pain can be random and etc., but can we notice what we're doing on a daily basis that might lead to that experience? That's sort of what this is trying to show us, basically. So when we'll take it back to mental health. I judge a situation as good or bad. So perhaps it doesn't happen to me as much anymore, but if I was having a hard time getting organized in the morning, because that was really hard for me, and I start to think, oh my God, I'm such a useless piece of crap. I'm never going to be able to function in society. And then I would start to feel anger usually, and frustration. And so then this cycle would start in me where my thoughts would be spinning, my emotions would rise and get intense. My physical reaction would be I'd start to get sweaty, or my breathing would, I guess, shorten. And then my behavior would be, often I would throw things around, or I would have a full-on adult temper tantrum on the ground. And that's what the pattern would be. And then I basically would have, I'd sort of climax and then I'd basically sort of be in a depressive state, if you will. And so that's the pattern. It's going to look different for everybody, and there's so many different situations that can trigger it. But if we can become aware of how that works for us, it's really, really helpful. And you may, a lot of times when I do workshop type of stuff, we would get into groups and we would start to list all the things that happen to us personally in these categories. So you may want to practice that. And again, I'm pretty sure in the self-care guide that's on the website, there's a little description of this. And here's how, are there any questions? I guess I'm just checking the time. Does anyone have any questions, or has anybody typed anything in?
So there's been a number of comments.
Okay.
One person made the point that this goes back a few slides, but when you were talking about I think it's when you were talking about responsibility, but the comment was around not making a decision is a decision, and sort of the idea that you're even if you're choosing to do nothing, that's still choosing something, which I thought was really really bright. And there's been a number of comments of people just basically saying that you're speaking their mind. One person said, I guess they find a challenge with, hearing what you're saying and saying yes, 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 but they're saying it's hard to actually do it. It's easy to kind of accept the concept. It's hard to actually practice, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. That's great, because I often forget that the things that I am talking about, I would say, are also ideals. And I forget to preface that sometimes. So thank you for that comment, because that is really helpful. And even as a reminder to myself, because sometimes I can be quite hard on myself. But yeah, so a lot of these things are ideals. And, from a mindfulness perspective, the idea would be, can I notice when I'm not in alignment with these ideals? And then can I notice what some of those barriers might be, and what can I do to realign with the ideals? And we're never necessarily going to live them out all the time, but it's the balance between noticing when we're not in alignment with them. Is this causing me suffering? What are the consequences of not living in alignment with them? And then how do I get back on track? And I remember the person who I showed as Yoda. I remember I had been sober for maybe 6 months, and I thought I was on top of the world. Life is so good, yada, yada, yada. And he said to me, enjoy it because it's fleeting, right? Or don't hold on to it too tight. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm cured. And then, a month later, I was in a gutter kind of crying kind of thing, or in the fetal position crying. And that's an example of, we can have moments of this clarity, and we can have moments of feeling free and relieved from the emotional turmoil. But it's those nice experiences pass as well. So the good, the bad, it's almost as if I like this I guess way of articulating it that my teacher Heidi explained to us one day, is that if you can sort of think of yourself as the sunshine, or your awareness is the sunshine, and our emotions and our thoughts and our body sensations are the weather. So sometimes, the storm cloud of sadness comes and dumps on us, but then it passes, and then same with happiness, and same with all these other experiences. And the more we can rest in awareness, the less those storms can sort of rule our experience. So is there any other things in
thanks,
there?
Mike. There's just two other points that are different, but I think related. One comment is, mental health symptoms may have some correlation with nutrition diet as per some readings. And the other I don't know that they're necessarily questions, but I just want to mention them.
Yeah.
And the other one was, around genetic disposition or predisposition to mental health issues.
Yeah, definitely. So my brother and I would be a good example of that. And also the diet thing. So personally, diet is a huge challenge for me, like incredibly difficult. I like candy. I like sugar. And I don't eat very well. You know, I'm lucky to have some sort of metabolism where like maybe it doesn't impact me as much as it might, but that's a really hard one for me, big time. So this, getting back to the slides here, this is a sort of more thorough example of that previous slide about how this all works inside of us. And the, a very common quote in mindfulness is learning to respond rather than react. And that's where maybe that patience comes into, and the non-judging. It's, oh, this experience is happening right now, or someone cuts me off in traffic, or my son says something or behaves in a way that I don't like. And before I jump on top of him, oh, hello. Before I jump on top of him and start lecturing him, can I just pause and maybe not react in a way that is not helpful? And so again, personally, if I am judging myself or criticizing myself for something, can I just create a tiny little bit of space there that I can start to respond a little more helpfully? And this is a little bit of a helpful thing to touch on the mental health idea, is everybody experiences all of these things, right? Like we all get paranoid, we all get sad, we all get we get on the spectrum of mania, right? Or where we're really happy and excited and whatever. We all get frustrated. We all, these are human experiences, and that's sort of where the crossover would be to a psychiatric diagnosis would be the frequency, intensity, and duration. So am I sad all the time? Is it really intense? Excuse me. Does it get in the way of me doing certain things that I'd like to do? That's the short end of the stick. And part, this presentation isn't necessarily about identifying diagnoses, but I think that's a helpful thing to bring into our awareness, So a suggestion might be, if we're experiencing physical discomfort, how does this play into it? And then how does our relationship to that discomfort play into it? And if we can manage our relationship to it, or at least if we can bring some more kindness and softness to that, at least that's the theory in MBSR with chronic pain, right? It's not the pain, it's our relationship to the pain. And that's where mindfulness and just a lot of this stuff can be really helpful. And that goes to here. This might be more interpersonal, or even like within yourself. When I experience something, can I identify the difference between a thought and a feeling? So we often say, I feel that you're not being nice to me, right? Or if I always use my wife and children as scapegoats to make these points. If my wife's behaving a way that I don't like, and I say, I feel that you're being disrespectful, or I feel that you're being mean, or whatever it is. It's not actually a feeling, right? It's a thought. So I think you're being rude, or I think you're disrespectful, and I feel sad, or I feel angry, or I feel, happy, or whatever it is, And if we can start to have moments where we can pick those two things apart, it can be really, really helpful. And I remember in one of the comments on the survey about how people maybe respond to us or react to us when we are telling them what's going on, So if you're explaining your your experience with dystonia and they're just not being respectful or kind about how they're receiving that, can you distinguish between these two things? And if you choose to respond to the person or say something, it can be really helpful to say, I think you're, dismissing what I'm saying, and that makes me feel sad. Rather than sort of saying something like, you're making me angry because you're not listening or whatever. And we all do that, right? So it's just, this is a helpful practice, I think, for parsing that out. And the next thing, I'll try to go through this slowly, but it's just to show you, and you can Google it. And in the aftermath of this, like the follow-up materials, I can provide you places to find this type of stuff to help you. But I don't know if maybe I can ask a question. Has anybody heard of cognitive behavioral therapy? You can sort of say yes or no, but
Yeah.
Cool. So
Yes.
there's also, which I'm more inclined to admire, it's mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, I think it is. So it's one step, I don't know, further down the road from CBT, but anyhow, so this is I had some formatting issues here, but we'll just like run through this quickly because I think it can be helpful. Situation. So we'll go for the first one. Situation. Where were you? So if I'm filling this out, I would say I'll bring my wife and do it again. Okay. We're having a heated discussion over roles and responsibilities in the house, and I get really worked up over this particular situation. So I would write down, at home, in my bedroom, sitting on the bed, discussing roles and responsibilities in the house with my wife. And so the next one would be emotion. What did you feel? And rate the intensity. So I felt really frustrated and maybe really anxious and maybe angry. And then the intensity in the book, or where this comes from, it's called Mind Over Mood. It's the most famous CBT workbook out there. I would rate out of 100 the intensity of those emotions. And then the next thing would be rate my belief. So I guess the thought would be, my wife is so disrespectful because she doesn't acknowledge the things that I do, right? So that would be my thought. And how much do I believe that thought to be true? So I would write that down, and then I would write the evidence for that thought. So is it actually true that she doesn't value or respect what I'm doing? Maybe yes, maybe no, but that's where I can provide evidence for or against, basically. Those would be the next two columns. So here's an example of her not respecting me. Here's an example of her respecting me. And then the last two things there are, can I start to tell myself a different story about what's happening here? And if I can't, can I imagine what that story might be? And so then I would fill that in the balanced alternative thought, and then I can rate my emotions again at the end. And if usually there's a big difference between the first record of the emotion and the last. So if we take it back to our emotional and physical discomfort, I assume, okay, I don't want to put words into anyone's mouth, but there's been times where your physical distress with dystonia has caused maybe friction with your relationships with people or with yourself. So can you think of examples in that realm where something like this might be helpful? Okay, and I know we don't have time to really dig into the details of this, but there's a tremendous amount of information on this stuff online, and you can read about it and And again, in the follow-up materials, I'll source where you can get some access to some of these things. So this is to take this a bit further, and also as it relates to your interactions with other people. There's a huge difference between listening and hearing. And this one's tricky because when we're trying to communicate our discomfort or distress or whatever it is, turmoil, often we want to be heard, right? We want the person we're talking to listen to us, and to validate our experience and etc. But oftentimes that's not going to happen. And it's how we navigate that can maybe influence the outcome of that interaction. And I would suggest practicing this with other people. So when other people when you can notice when they want your attention or when they are trying to tell you something, are you listening to them, right? Because we often expect things of other people that we may not be as good at providing. And this is a really good way to notice within yourself how you are responding to other people so that you might be able to be more kind and patient with others when they're not listening to you. That's a really helpful practice. I wonder one day we can, I don't know how you could do it virtually, but there's some really nice partner practices with this. Maybe you could do it with the wall or something, who knows, or a teddy bear or whatever. But speaking to one another in a way that's respectful and I guess values the person's experience. Let's see, got a few more minutes. I'm going to skip this one here, but well, actually, I'll go through it quickly. So there's this idea or this concept called the negativity bias. And basically what it is trying to tell us is that as humans, we've evolved to notice danger and negative things in our environment. And that's how we survived, right? So, oh my God, there's a tiger over there and it's going to come and eat me if I don't do something. And so the reactions are usually fight, flight, and freeze. And so our brains are wired to look for negative situations and danger. So now that we're not necessarily in danger for our lives by the tiger or the snake or the whatnot, our brains seem to be going through some sort of evolutionary process where we're turning that onto emotional experiences. And we're really critical of ourselves and we're critical of other people. I mean, it's just so intense. And our memory is coded to notice negative things and dangers. So it's deeply embedded in us. And that's, again, part of this healing in this space that we're trying to create to get out of that. And the next thing, this is from Tara Brach, who's a lovely Buddhist teacher. She calls it tend and befriend. So rather than getting caught in that negative pattern of seeing problems and getting caught, can we tend and befriend these situations? So, and this sort of kinder way of addressing these situations is also harder for our brains to encode. So the research, the neuroscience research says you need about 20 to 30 seconds of acknowledging a nice, loving situation for it to start to encode into your memory, as opposed to the instant negativity pattern. So that's something to try to practice, you know. And if it comes to physical discomfort, it would look like, oh my God, this pain in my leg's never going to go away. Life is horrible. I'm never going to be able to do anything, whatever. And then the tend and befriend would be, I'm noticing this incredible discomfort in my leg. And maybe it's not as bad as it was last time, or what can I do better? And then starting to value and enjoy the newer way of dealing with that. That's sort of my quick way of acknowledging. And how we can, so as I went back to, I know I probably just need a couple more minutes. We're right at the end almost. I guess we are at the end. This goes back to the interaction, the hearing and the listening kind of thing, but you can also use this for your own experience. So how this would look personally would be, I'm noticing this incredible anger inside of me. And so rather than not acknowledging it and trying to make it go away or pretend it's not there or going on some freaking angry tirade, if I can validate that experience, oh my God, right now I'm getting really angry. Just the naming of that right there soothes us quite quickly, and accepting it and not wanting it to be different. So, oh my God, I'm so angry. And that's okay. I can deal with this, or I know how to get through this. And the presence, excuse me, is being, not trying to eat my way out of it or do drugs to get out of it. That would be the presence. So being with that discomfort in the moment. And if you turn this to an interaction with somebody else, so somebody is angry or someone is not in a good place, validating them, saying, to me, it looks like you're having a really hard time. And accepting that I can't make this person be different or respond to me differently. And the presence is, I'm not trying to run away from this, and I'm looking this person in the eye and I'm acknowledging that they are who they are, right? So maybe if it's a caregiver is getting angry or frustrated with us, you can turn to them and say, I can see that this, to me, it looks like this is making you angry right now. Or to me, it looks like you're having a hard time. And that's okay. I'm not trying to make you change or be a different person. And here I am, and I'm willing to work with you or try to make it better. It's a really powerful practice, and just little moments throughout the day. So this was sort of one of the last things I wanted to work through, but we're kind of getting to the end. So this is in the self-care book on the website. So I would encourage you to go there. And this is part of that tend and befriend practice. Can we start to orient our attention and our thoughts and etc. to these more pleasurable experiences in life? Because it takes more time and more energy to do that. But the more we practice, the better we get, and the less the other sort of yucky parts don't happen as often. So I think, that, I guess that's sort of, I think I'll stop it there because I've been talking about a lot of different kind of ideas, but they all kind of wrap into one. Although, Steph, what do you think? Like, there's one other thing I was going to talk about, but what is everyone else saying?
So we've got a few people just saying great presentation. We have, I think your approach is really thought-provoking. Somebody said, I don't think I realized how living with this chronic pain has changed the person I was. And
right.
So I think that, that's probably something that many of the people on this call might be thinking, and I just wanted to bring it forward. I think it's brave, and certainly there's, we know that there is significant challenges that come from dystonia, and you guys are all incredibly brave every day. And I think, this presentation kind of makes you take a step back, and I found it very calming. So thank you very much for that. There's a couple of questions from people who are asking about the website. So just be assured that following this presentation, Mike and I will send you out a copy of the webinar, and we'll send you a direct link to the guide that he's referred to a few times, as well as, Mike, I think you mentioned you may have some additional web links on either the CBT practice or yeah, okay. So we will get you guys, I have all of your email addresses. I will get you guys the all of these details so that you have them for follow-up. And yeah, great reminders, extremely helpful. Thank you. Excellent. Thanks. Wonderful. Thank you for the information. I guess, I mean, we do have probably a few minutes if there's any final questions. I don't want anybody to feel rushed or that you didn't have a chance to express yourself. Is there any final thoughts or questions from the group?
So as they're writing, I just want to talk to this one slide. If people still have up their things up, this isn't in that guide, but we'll include it in the follow-up email. I think that this, at least personally, this practice has been incredibly helpful, this sort of self-compassion, mindful self-compassion. But this letter here, if you could try it, I think it would be really helpful. And the idea is that you bring to mind a difficult situation in your life, so whether it's physical or maybe interpersonal, and you write yourself a letter as if you were sort of a wise elder or somebody with unlimited compassion and patience and understanding, and you tell yourself, ideally, something kind and loving, as if you were that wise elder person. And so personally, when I have a rough situation happening and I write myself this letter, it sort of sounds like, hi, Mike, I see that you're suffering right now, or I see that you're having a very hard time. And knowing your experience and knowing who you are, it's very normal that you're having this hard time. And it's okay, and you're going to be okay, and there's lots of things you can do to be okay. That's the sort of gist of it, but I think it's a really nice practice. And I think the further layer to all of this is learning to just love ourselves a little bit more, to be a little more kind and patient, and just breathe, you know? So that would be my last thing. But yeah, this will be included too,
So thanks, Mike. A couple of additional questions. Somebody had asked, is there any Canadian dystonia support groups online? So we currently have a number of support groups that exist. They're not exclusively online. However, in some instances, there are Facebook groups, or some people connect by email. So I'm going to write this individual back just with my email address. But for anybody else who's interested in connecting through a local support group, we have wonderful leaders. You don't have to go to a meeting in person if you're not comfortable or not interested in doing that. It probably makes sense to reach out to us, though, because we may be able to connect you virtually to somebody who is in your same situation or who's interested in kind of just having a relationship online. So know that that's available. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is that we had a wonderful volunteer who actually compiled a list of mental health resources for the entire country. So looking at provincial assistance programs, both private and public. So I will also send that link out to you guys as well, because obviously we're a small organization. We love bringing you these types of things, but it's also really great to be able to take advantage of local services that are available to you. So know that you're not alone. Know that there's lots of information and resources available. We'll do our best to support you and to get you what you need. So please always feel free to reach out to us here at the Foundation. So Mike, thank you so much. I can't tell you how many people have written here to say that they loved it, really recognizing the physical pain connection to physical pain mentally, I guess, or mental pain, I should say. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your presentation. I also want to thank all of you guys for joining us and for taking this time for yourselves. It's really important, obviously, to take care of yourselves and to take the first step in changing your mindset. We really appreciate you guys being here with us, and stay tuned. We'll be sending you all of this information in the coming days. So thanks again, everyone, and be well. Thank you. Bye.
I don't know how to